Mother Dark begat 3 children. The first, Tyst and Dee, were her dearest, dwellers of the land before light. Then were birthed in pain the second, Tyst Lians, the burning glory of light itself. And so the first denied their mother in their fury, and so were cast out, doomed children of Mother Dark. She then gave rise in her mercy to the third, spawn of the war between dark and light, the Tyst Eder, and there was shadow upon their souls.
What up, and welcome back to another Malazan Book of the Fallen video. We're in the double digits now. Chapter 10. Let's get it. As usual, we're going to go through the whole chapter in a non-spoilery way, and then we're going to let the new recruits know when they need to jump out so the vets can get into all that spoilery goodness. But we pick up with Gruntle, who is basically reeling after that ultimate gut punch that we had at the end of, I think, chapter 7, where Harlow steps between him and these Kell hunters and essentially jumps on the grenade to be able to save Gruntle's life. And we get this kind of role reversal kind of thing, right, where good old friend Buke shows up and tries to kind of get Gruntle snapped out of it in a way, and you know, Gruntle's like, yeah, you know, we're both these kind of hollowed out husks of men or whatever, and suffered these huge, you know, catastrophic losses. And Butte goes, yeah, but you're not like me, you know, you don't have that kind of you know, emptiness inside yet. You still have something left to live for. And he's like, yeah, but it was like a meaningless death for Harlow to step in. And Buke said something to the effect of like, you know, all deaths are meaningless until we give them meaning with our lives. And you know, for me, as somebody who had to like deal with death at a very young age and whatnot, these chapters have always really spoken to me for that reason.
I feel like you get me.
And it kind of works for Gruntle too, because he's ultimately like shamed back into action, basically, or shamed back to life in a way. You know, with a really strong dose of like the tough love, with a heavy, you know, undercurrent of like empathy and compassion and understanding. So yeah, dope friend scene. We find out that Bauchelain and Korbal Broach are still up to their, you know, tricks and up to no good, and they want to stop them, but there's really just nothing they can do because these guys are just straight up too OP. So instead they kind of hatch this plan where they're going to keep them in their back pocket and use them, you know, use kind of to point this loaded gun outside at this approaching Panian army, and then just hopefully in the meantime like mitigate Korbal Broach's shady dealings such that they can kind of minimize the, you know, murders that are happening in Kapustan. You get a little bit more of the gray swords, right? And Ithkovian finally sees like the full display of the Panian strength with like, you know, 100,000 troops, but then also just, you know, Tenniscoury out there, and he is straight up shook. But he goes back inside and goes with Hatan to this kind of audience that she's trying to set up with the Masked Council, which is kind of that like religious ruling body within Kapustan. On the way there, she's like, yo, look, you're gonna get rode hard, put away wet. And he's like, well, you know, I took a vow of celibacy. And she's like, I don't care about that.
It's about to go down.
Bruchalion tells everybody, you know, look, the IMAS have agreed to kind of take on this Kell Hunter, Kachane Shamal component of this battle, but what they're not going to do is take on the whole Panian army and kill all the Tenascowry, the Erdeman, Seardaman, all that stuff. So they basically have about 6 weeks between the time when Kaladin, Brood, and Dujek and this whole big giant army can come to relieve them. And so they got to hold out for that whole time. And Ithkovian is like highly skeptical because, you know, more defensible, like well fortified and provisioned cities have fallen in half the time. And so, you know, they've got a long row to hoe, I guess it would be the best way to put that. And even though the Barghast have about 70,000 troops plus probably out there, Hatan tells them, dude, you're going to get shunned. We're not riding, you know, to your rescue, so don't count on that.
The answer is hell no.
But then we kind of get some insight into the real reason that Hatan was out, you know, scouting for the spirits and seeing what's up with these Kell Hunters. But there was a much longer standing beef where they're basically, you know, Kapustan was built on top of their old sacred, like, burial grounds, and so they want to be recognized as the formal owners and granted rights to be able to make pilgrimages. But there's even something else, which is that they have the kind of bones, the remains of their ancient ancestors there in the city, and Hatan wants to be able to take those and reunite them back with the tribes. Of course, the Masked Council being so, you know, shady and bureaucratic, whatever, they totally try and use that as a way to blackmail the Barghast into the fray against the Panians. And Hatan's like, yo, look, if you don't give me this, we're not coming to your help, number one. And number two, if I don't get what I want, everybody in this room going down.
Damn, girl. You a badass.
But it's pretty badass, right? Because A, it's not just super important because they're the ancestors and actually the remains of the Barghast gods themselves, the most ancient ancestors. And what's so dope is that it was like a total bluff, right? Like, Hatan calls them out for hiding the remains and not telling them, but she didn't even really know and was just rolling the dice and got them to admit that they had this stuff the whole time. And so it's just a beautifully played strategic kind of dupe by the Barghast and her dad in particular, and they actually agree to give the stuff back.
Look at us. Look at us. Huh? Who would have thought? Not me.
After this whole audience is done, they kind of pull Bruchalion aside and they're like, yo, look, we know this city's done and we're gonna, you know, take the L no matter what. And Bruchalion's like, yo, I don't think that's actually the case. He's like, you know, what we need to do is like bring all those troops that you're leaving outside the walls back inside so they don't get slaughtered right off the bat. They're like, nah, we're gonna leave those anyway. So on the one hand, they're like, you know, we're done for, but on the other hand, they're like, yeah, we're just going to leave our troops out on the front gates to see what happens, maybe. They try and find out and pry about what's going on with these Talon Imas, these undead wolves that people have been seeing around. They're like, do those belong to those, like, weird necromancer guys that we heard moved into the city? And Ithkovian's like, I don't know. You get a little bit of back and forth with Wrath Fenner and Wrath Trake on the Masked Council, and it's clear that Wrath Fenner is all jealous of Wrath Trake trying to take a spot on the council. We have Carnatus, who's like totally wants to expose Wrath Fenner for the fraud that he is, and Bruchalion's like, yo, no, we got bigger fish to fry. But then the captain of the guard comes in and they start digging up the floor in this audience chamber to reveal all these old boats and canoes of the Barghast with the remains and kind of reuniting Hatan and Kafal with their memories and these remains, and so they still don't totally know how they're going to get all these ships and bones and all that stuff out of there, but in some ways it's kind of irrelevant because the main goal has been achieved just by unlocking these memories and being able to connect the dots and actually reunite with the ancestors, that it kind of starts off that process of the ascension to godhood.
And boom goes the dynamite.
Gruntle finally, gets his act together and goes to visit Stani after Buke visits him and gets him to clean up his act a little bit. And she she's become a little bit of a religious zealot, right? Or not a zealot, but she's become a true believer in Karuli and Karuli's God. And she tells Gruntle, you need to go over there and straight up say thank you because Karuli saved our ass. Gruntle does go and apologize to Karuli and has a little chat. He tells him that he knows about their kind of little side mission with him and Buke, and tells them that they need help to pursue this case, and that when help presents itself to accept, and that help is on the way. He gives Gruntle this little clay bird that he's supposed to crush up and drink, that he's supposed to give to Buke to crush up and drink, and that is going to help them with their case as well. But he definitely says, just hang on because help is on the way. And then he goes afterwards and tells Stani, keep an eye on Gruntle because he's got a rough one ahead of him. Then we get Kafal, and he's kind of grappling with all this knowledge, right? That they used to be seafarers, that they, are basically descendants of the Talan Imas, and that everything we learned about from Talmondes was in fact true. There's all this stuff where the Moranth and them kind of speak the same language, so something is going on there, and we don't really know what yet at this point, but Bauchelain really wants to know what, the Barghasts are up to and if they're going to engage and what the whole deal is there. And so he's like, if Hatan wants you, he's like, you're going to get busy with her, celibacy vow or no celibacy vow. And he's like, yo, I don't know about that. He's like, if that's what she wants, you will be giving it up. And then it kind of ends with this weird little confrontation with Wrath Trake coming up and acknowledging Carnatus as Fenner's Destrian, asking him why he hasn't blown Wrath Fenner out of the water and taken his rightful place, and just kind of raising a lot of philosophical questions about why would there be two gods of war, and it gives Bauchelain and Carnatus a lot to think about, shall we say. So, and that's it. They're fast-paced chapters now in book 2, and they're focused on one storyline at a time. So we're going to leave the chapter stuff here. I hope the newbies liked it. Now it's time for you to leave so that mommy and daddy can talk about the adult stuff, which is that juicy, spoilery goodness. There's actually a lot of really cool foreshadowing in this chapter that I love, and that whole exchange between Wrath Trake and Bauchelain and Carnatus, and also to a lesser extent when they were going back and forth with Wrath Trake and Wrath Fenner, foreshadowing Fenner's death and just asking why, kind of putting perspective around why Trake would be ascending and why he didn't go through Hood's Gate, and the whole stuff with Kalava at the beginning and all of that. And the Destrian clearly knows what's up, right? Because Wrath Fenner's trying to clown Wrath Trake for trying to front as the god of war or whatever, and is like, oh, that's preposterous. And Carnatus is actually shook, and he's like, we might have some issues closer to home, and lo and behold, that was in fact the case, right? Fenner was going down like a dog. I never noticed this before too, but I love how Stani was actually training that Grey Sword recruit who went with Ithkovian on the initial Kel Hunter run, and who he was all worried that she was going to be traumatized, and she was like, yo, I'm ready to rock. Then, afterwards she enters the city and is training and doing sword training with Stani, so you get a little foreshadowing of the kind of Toll the Hounds fighting school that she sets up down the road in Darujistan. And I love how it's even though it's not totally obvious that Karuli is Krull at this point, I just love how it's all, humanizing this elder god, in Stani's speech about how he doesn't have servants, he has friends, right? And how he's and even in his relationship with Envy, he's convincing her, he's not strong-arming her into doing the stuff that he wants her to do. He's convincing her of that mutual shared interest or whatever, or the shared benefit, and kind of in some ways he's actually deploying that same strategy with these powerful ascendants and gods and people like Tool and Envy and all these other folks that he suggested that kind of criminal bosses in, I can't remember the name of the town, but where Nectara was, and he said like, yo, you need like this information campaign where you use like sunlight as the best disinfectant and show what happens if we do nothing. And I just love that aspect of Krull, because again, here's a guy who's an elder god and could shut down, access to the warrens or do crazy stuff, you know what I mean? And instead he's like convincing and winning people over to his side. He's like the old school, Dale Carnegie, winning friends and influencing people. You also get some like baby foreshadowing, or maybe, evidence is probably like a better word for it, but for Gruntle's love for Stani, because she's like, yeah, I wasn't going to come there and clean you up, you stunk, and you needed to be cleaned up from your hangover, but I wasn't going to be the one to do it. And he's all like googly eyes for her and stuff, and we know that on his deathbed where he's thinking about her, and there's a strong case that he was in love with her the whole time, just like Harlow. And again, it's just like all this connective tissue that starts in the mid part of book 2 of Memories of Ice that is still paying off at the end of the Crippled God. So good stuff. Also, like, is Krull making Soul Taken by just giving people clay to put in their iced tea? Because if so, sign me up. There's also like a lot of really cool backstory when Kafal was exploring the canoes and the boats and stuff, and the whole like IMAS Tisti Dur scrap, right? Because they took to the seas and they were the seafaring people, like, hunting down Jagat or whatever, and then they like run across these Tisti Dur, and they beat their ass supposedly and drove them probably to Lether, is kind of what I understood, and that's why they became this kind of like folks that were on this continent that they didn't know what the hell was going on, and as opposed to being this big successful kind of ocean faring people with a strong navy and all of that stuff, and just how like maybe the Moranth were like the IMAS who got along with them and went, because it seemed like they got munitions from the Tisti Dur as part of that story too. So just a lot of that really cool backstory, and actually a lot of just Midnight Tides foreshadowing in the first place, because when they're down south, I think Envy has the whole thing where she's talking to Krull, and he's like mentions the Grey Raiders or something like that, and those were the dudes out looking for champions to scrap Rulod at the time. So actually just a lot of really good stuff that again shows just a lot of planning, stuff that wasn't going to be paying off for still thousands of pages down the road. So yeah, really fun chapter. I think this whole book too is so fast paced. I love the just one storyline per chapter. So we're jamming through. Gonna do more. Hope you enjoyed this one. Like, subscribe, merch, Patreon membership, Discord for sure. And check out the announcement that's going to be coming up soon, because we're launching the Unabridged Burners website. So stay tuned. We'll see you on the next one. And oh yeah, happy reading.